Hi everyone, I got a request to show you how I solve this reading comprehension passage. It's the last passage in the GMAT Official Advanced Questions book. So I'll jump right in. I start by just reading the beginning of the passage and then I make decisions on what to skip. It says there are two theories that have been used to explain ancient and modern tragedy. Neither of what? Well, neither of those two theories, neither quite explains the complexity of the tragic process or the tragic hero, comma. Just pause there and note that this seems like a criticism, right? The author is criticizing both of those theories. Neither quite explains the complexity, right? If you have theories, you'd want them to explain the complexity. These don't, comma, but each explains important elements of tragedy, and because their conclusions are contradictory, they represent extreme views. So I need to take a long pause here and just digest what I just read. So the author is letting us know that there are two theories that exist. They've been used to explain ancient and modern tragedy. Criticism is that neither quite explains the complexity of the tragic process or the tragic hero. But on the positive note, each explains important elements of tragedy. And because their conclusions are contradictory, so we didn't know that until now, right? These two theories have contradictory conclusions, and because of that, they represent extreme views. Now, does the author think that extreme views is good or is bad? Like, is this a criticism? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. And then it says the first theory states that, okay, so now we're about to learn what the first theory states. And I'm going to make an educated guess here that later on in the passage, it'll say the second theory states that, or something like that. And here you have to make a decision. Do you want to study what these two theories state exactly, and in what way are they contradictory, and all of that kind of good stuff? Or do you want to just skip all of that and go back to it when you need it? And my opinion is you should always skip. And the reason it's important to skip is because the trap answers in every question will always have something from one of the details in the passage. And by skipping all the details in my first read, I make myself less attracted to those trap answers. So I'm just noting to myself that here it's talking about the first theory, but this theory, blah, 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 oversimplification I saw there. Okay, so he's talking about what's wrong with that theory, skipping all of this, skipping. The second theory of tragedy states that, oh, so my educated guess paid off. That's exactly what I thought I'd see later on. Looks like that's the last paragraph of the passage. So just in terms of the structure, we have a super long first paragraph all the way from the beginning to line 30. That's 30 lines of text, all one paragraph. And in that paragraph, the author both introduces the big picture idea that there are two contradictory theories that have been used to explain ancient and modern tragedy. And he also talks about the problems with the first theory in that first paragraph. And then the second paragraph is much smaller. It's just lines 31 to 43. And that's just telling us about the second theory. Okay, so I'm ready to look at the first question, which just so happens to be a primary purpose question. Primary purpose of the passage is to A, compare and criticize two theories of tragedy. I love that. That looks to me like exactly the right answer. I will go through the other four just to make sure that I don't like them as much as I liked A. So B says develop a new theory of tragedy. I didn't see any indication of the author wanting to do that, right? We just had, what was it again? We had the first theory states that, and then in line 31, we had the second theory states that. So definitely not B. C, summarize the thematic content of tragedy. No, this is about the two theories of tragedy, not about the thematic content of tragedy. D, reject one theory and offer another theory in its place. No, I didn't see any indication that the author is rejecting one theory and then offering another. No, he or she is telling us about two theories and kind of criticizing both in different ways, but not rejecting one and offering. Offering means the author is coming up with his or her own theory, right? A new one that we didn't know before. That's not what's happening here. E, distinguish between tragedy and irony. I, without reading all the details, I bet that the author does do that just because I know how they design trap answers. I bet the author does do that somewhere, but that wasn't the primary purpose of the passage. How do I know? Well, because I read all of the big picture stuff, and if answer choice E is in there, it's just a detail. And I accidentally clicked it, and of course it's showing me that is the wrong answer. So I'm going to go with A, and of course that is correct. All right, so the second question we have here is the following. And by the way, I've never solved or tried to solve any of these questions before, so you're really seeing me trying this for the first time, okay? The author states that the theories discussed in the passage, so the author states, not the theories state. Right? I know that the theories state blah, blah, blah. Where was it? In line right? Line 7 and line 31 is where the theories state stuff, but this is the author states that the theories discussed in the passage represent extreme views. Right, I remember seeing that and wondering, does the author think that that's a good thing or a bad thing? Okay, so this question is saying the author states they represent extreme views because why? Why does the author state that they represent extreme views? And I actually remember seeing, because I read that part, why do they represent extreme views? Because their conclusions are contradictory. So I'm just going to go ahead with D because that's exactly what it says there. Okay, so I remembered where to look because it just so happens that this is part of that big picture stuff. This is not a detail. Okay, so and that's on purpose, right? The GMAT created this question or designed this question to make it easier for those who only read the big picture stuff and skipped all the details, and make it harder for those who read everything, right? Because the more text you read, the bigger chunk of your brain is preoccupied with that part, that big picture stuff. Okay, keep moving. The author objects to the theory that all tragedy exhibits the workings of external fate. All right, so this I haven't read about. So now I'm going to have to find where the author objects to the theory that all tragedy exhibits the workings of external fate. Okay? So probably the best way to approach this is to search for the phrase external fate. So I'm just going to scan the passage, searching for those two words, and it actually jumped out at me right away because I started searching from where I stopped reading. So I stopped reading at that period and I started searching for external fate, and there it is. Okay, so I chose external fate because that seemed like an easy phrase to search for, to scan for, and it's unlikely that they rephrased the words. I mean, how many different ways are there to say external fate? I can't imagine any other way to say it, so it's likely that those exact two words will be found in the passage, and indeed, there they are. So my next move now is to learn all there is to learn about external fate, right? So again, the author objects to the theory that all tragedy exhibits the workings of external fate, implying the author believes that some tragedy doesn't exhibit the workings of external fate. Okay, so the first theory states that all tragedy exhibits the workings of external fate. There we go. And the author objects to this primarily because, and so that's what we're trying to find now. Primarily, what is the author's main reason for objecting to that theory? So let's read. Of course, the overwhelming majority of tragedies do leave us with a sense of the supremacy of impersonal power and of the limitation of human effort. But, here comes the objection, this theory of tragedy is an oversimplification. And look how beautiful this is. Primarily because, and look at this, primarily because, right? Primarily because why? So let's read this. What's it? The theory confuses the tragic condition with the tragic process. Now I do see a colon here. If this is an easy question, the correct answer will just say this, right? The theory confuses a tragic condition with a tragic process. If it's a hard question, then I'm going to have to really read that and then search for something about that in the correct answer choice. Okay, so quickly scanning the answer choices, I'm not seeing confuses the tragic condition with a tragic process. So I am going to read the stuff after the colon. It says, the theory does not acknowledge that fate in a tragedy normally becomes external to the hero only after the tragic process has been set in motion. Okay, so I'm imagining in my mind a timeline. You've got before the tragic process has been set in motion, and you've got after the tragic process has been set in motion. And the problem with this theory is it does not acknowledge that fate becomes external to the hero only after that point in time. So answer choice A, a fate in tragedies is not as important a cause of action as is the, no, I'm going to stop reading there. B, fate in tragedies does not appear to be something that is external to the tragic hero until after the tragic process has begun. I'm just going to go ahead and pick B and move on to the next question. Okay, so that is exactly how I would do it on the test. I would not read C, D, and E here because, well, for one thing, I loved B. B was saying exactly what I needed it to say. And for another thing, there's a limited amount of time on this test. So I really see no reason in reading C, D, and E. I mean, imagine if I read C, D, and E and then I like one of them. So now I like B and another answer choice. Why would I want to be in that position on the test? Much rather just pick B and move on. Next question. Which of the following comparisons of the tragic with the ironic hero? So I've got a tragic hero and I've got an ironic hero. And this is a question about comparisons of those guys, the tragic hero, the ironic hero, which is best supported by information contained in the passage. Okay, so I'm probably going to have to find some information in the passage about tragic and ironic heroes, ideally a comparison between them. So I'm going to scan probably the easiest words, the easiest phrase to scan for here is ironic hero. I think tragic will show up a lot because it's about theories of tragedy. But if I can find the phrase ironic hero, that'll probably be a good place to look at. And the word irony just jumped out at me both there and there. I don't see an ironic hero at the moment, but I am going to go ahead and read that whole sentence. Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and read this part. I'm just scanning the next sentence, and I'm also scanning the last paragraph there. See if I see anything about ironic hero. I'm not seeing the word irony or ironic, so I'm just going to go ahead and read this sentence. This theory of tragedy does not distinguish tragedy from irony. Irony does not need an exceptional central figure. As a rule, the more ignoble the hero, the sharper the irony, when irony alone is the objective. Actually, we'll read the next sentence because it's talking about the difference, right? It is heroism that creates the splendor and exhilaration that is unique to tragedy. Okay, so I think now I know the difference between irony and tragedy. The ironic hero isn't really a hero, it's just a regular person, right? I got that. Not need an exceptional, right? It doesn't have to be exceptional. The more ignoble, the sharper the irony. Okay? So just a regular, ordinary person, common man, whereas the tragic hero does have to be extraordinary. So that's the difference. Which of the following comparisons of the tragic with the ironic hero is best supported? A tragic hero's fate is an external condition, but an ironic hero's fate, no, that's not what I just learned. B, a tragic hero must be controlled by fate, but no, that's not what I just read. A tragic hero's moral flaw surprises the audience, but an ironic hero's sin does not. It's a little bit tempting because if you're a superhero, then people will be surprised by your moral flaws, whereas if you're an ordinary man, people won't be surprised by your sins. But I'm not confident enough to just pick it and move on. So here I will read D and E. And you can see it's a judgment call in every question. A tragic hero and an ironic hero cannot both be virtuous figures in the same tragedy. No, I don't remember learning about that. A tragic hero is usually extraordinary, but an ironic hero may be cowardly or even villainous. I didn't say that an ironic hero may be cowardly or even villainous, but I guess ignoble, right? The more ignoble the hero, I guess ignoble could be cowardly or even villainous. So I'm gonna go with E. I do like it better than C. C wasn't a perfect fit because moral flaw and sin, those are words that go a bit further than what we saw in the passage. I think E sticks more closely to the information that I saw. So I'm going to go with E here. Okay, next question. The author contrasts an honest person and a criminal, lines 19 to 21. To what end? To why? Why did the author contrast them? Okay. Now, if I look at the lines 19 to 21, what will I see there? I will see the author contrasting those things, but I won't see why the author contrasted those things. So it's much easier in this question to find where the contrast is stated than it is to find why it was stated. And that's our job here. Okay, so how do I go about that? First of all, let's see what is that contrast. So it appears as external only after it has been violated. Now, I don't know what it is referring to, so I'm going to go back one sentence. Fate, as conceived in ancient Greek tragedy, is the internal balancing condition of life. It appears, so it is fate, it appears as external only after it has been violated. Well, what does it mean to violate fate? Well, if fate is the internal balancing condition of life, then I guess when you're out of balance, you're violating fate, just as justice is an internal quality of an honest person, but the external antagonist of the criminal. So that's a contrast between an honest person and a criminal that the question is asking about. And right before that contrast, I have the words just as. Okay, so when do we use the words just as in the English language? Well, we use them for some kind of analogy, right? So what is the analogy here? Well, the author wanted to draw an analogy between how fate can be internal versus external in before versus after it was violated, just as justice can be internal or external. So why did the author draw this contrast between honest and criminal as an analogy for how something can be both internal and external depending on the situation? Okay. So did the author do this to prove that fate cannot be external to the tragic? No. To establish a criterion that allows a distinction to be made between irony and tragedy? No, it's not to establish a criterion that allows a distinction to be made between irony and tragedy. It was to draw an analogy, right, to help us understand what is meant, what he said about fate. Is it to develop the distinction between the tragic condition and the... I don't believe so. To argue that the theme of omnipotent external fate is shared by comedy and tragedy. No. So I don't like any of these answer choices, which means what? I didn't read enough of the details to answer this. Now I have to make a judgment call depending on, do I tend to run out of time on the verbal section or not? If I tend to run out of time, if time is an issue for me on the verbal section, this is the perfect place to just make a completely random guess. I would have a 20% chance of getting the right answer and move on to the next question. If I don't tend to run out of time on the verbal section, well, now I can go and find some more information to read to see if any of these answer choices pops up in connection with these lines. where the author is contrasting an honest person and a criminal. Okay, so since this video is just to show how to solve these questions, I will search for some more information about that. I do see distinguishing tragedy from irony, but that looks like a secondarily thing, so that would actually eliminate the answer choice that talks about distinguishing tragedy and irony. That was B. So this is probably a reason a lot of people would pick B. I would actually eliminate it because it's separate. Why did the author introduce this contrast between a criminal and an honest person? Okay, so it seems to me like this sentence that I've highlighted here, which ends with a colon, is probably what the author wants to explain or detail all the way from here to here. And the reason I say that is because if you have secondarily here, then you're going to find a primarily, and there it is. So now I know that the primarily is going all the way to secondarily. So I suspect if I read everything that's highlighted right now, I will be able to answer this question. So primarily because it confuses, this is explaining why it's an oversimplification, right? Why is this theory of tragedy an oversimplification? Because it confuses the tragic condition with the tragic process. And if that's the purpose of all of this text, well, that's making me want to pick answer choice C. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pick C because that's what I would do on the test. So I'm literally showing you exactly what I would do in the test. And if I get it wrong, well, that's okay. I don't always get all the questions right. If it is right, let me go ahead and click it. Yeah, so that is the correct answer. So my takeaway from this, because I mean, just like you are trying to improve your process and your strategy for reading comprehension, I am also trying to improve mine. So what is my takeaway? What did I learn from this question? Because it didn't go smoothly for me at all. What I learned from it is this word, which I didn't really pay attention to until later, is a really important word. Right? Like I was saying a few seconds ago, if I have secondarily, there's going to be a primarily, and that's a great way for me to kind of see what is the chunk of text that kind of goes together. Unfortunately, when I first tried this question, what I did is I read this, and then I only went back to fate, right? So I only added that one sentence before it. What I should have done is I should have gone all the way back to primarily and read from there, and then I would have been just fine. Okay, so that's my takeaway from this question. All right, two more to go. The author suggests that the tragic hero's original destiny never quite fades out of the tragedy, primarily too. Okay, so this is a very similar question. It's asking, why did the author suggest this thing, right? What was the author's purpose in suggesting that? So apparently this happens in lines 29, 30, okay? So the glory of that original destiny never quite fades out of the tragedy. What was the author's purpose in saying that? Well, I can see that right afterwards we go into the second theory. So this is the author basically summarizing or concluding the author's opinion of that first theory. Okay, why say it at all? Well, the only way to answer that is to go back and read more stuff. Now, it looks like the secondarily that we were looking at earlier kind of goes all the way to here. Maybe it goes all the way to the end, in fact. I don't know. It's hard to say where the secondarily ends. Most likely it ends at the end of the paragraph. So I'm just going to go ahead and read that whole thing that I have highlighted here and then see if I can answer the question. So what does it say here? Secondarily, this theory of tragedy does not distinguish tragedy from irony. So this is a second reason for what? Well, this is a second reason for The author is saying that this theory of tragedy is an oversimplification, right? Primarily because blah, blah, blah. Secondarily, because why? Why is it an oversimplification? Because this theory does not distinguish tragedy from irony. Irony does not need an exceptional central figure. The tragic hero normally has an extraordinary. All right, so I already read that for a previous question. And the glory of that original destiny. What original destiny? This destiny here. So the tragic hero, as unlike the ironic hero, the tragic hero normally has an extraordinary, often a nearly divine destiny, almost within grasp. Almost within, I guess that's what makes it tragic, that it's not within grasp. It's almost within grasp. And the glory of that original destiny never quite fades out of the tragedy. Why is the author saying the glory of that original destiny never quite fades out of the tragedy? Honestly, I don't know. I don't know. So this is going to be a bit of an educated guess, perhaps. Why mention that? Qualify the assertion that the theory of tragedy as a display of external fate is inconsistent. Not liking that. Introduce the discussion of the theory that tragedy is the consequence of individual sin. I don't see. No, I don't see that. Refute the theory that the tragic process is more important than the tragic condition. Not seeing that either. Support the claim that heroism creates the splendor and exhilaration of tragedy. Was that even a claim? Oh, yeah, there was a claim. It is heroism that creates the splendor and exhilaration that is unique to tragedy. Hmm. The tragic hero normally has an extraordinary, often a nearly divine destiny almost within grasp, and the glory of that original destiny never quite fades out of the tragedy. I actually like D. I like it. E. Distinguish between fate as conceived in ancient Greek strategy and fate in more recent tragedy. I'm going to go with D. There you go. So I came into these answer choices pretty sure that I was going to have to guess. And maybe I got a little bit lucky, maybe call it an educated guess. I ended up picking the right answer. And that's, I mean, what you're seeing here is exactly how I would do it on the actual test. Of course, it would be a lot faster because I wouldn't be talking to a camera. I would just be thinking all of this in my head and going through the motions. And for the record, I don't tend to run out of time on the verbal section. But in terms of the thinking going on in my head, you're now seeing exactly what it would look like on the actual test. Last question. In the author's opinion, an act of humility in comedy is most analogous to. So I'm going to go ahead and scan the passage for this phrase or something as similar as possible to this phrase because I don't remember seeing anything about act of humility in comedy, which probably means that it's in the second in that last paragraph because that's the one where I haven't really read anything yet. So let's see if I can find anything about an act of humility in comedy. And sure enough, I think this very last sentence of the passage, I saw the word comedy in there. So let me go ahead and read that sentence. In fact, just to be safe, why don't I go one sentence back? Again, it is true, zoom in a bit. Again, it is true that the great majority of tragic heroes do possess hubris, or a proud and passionate mind that seems to make the hero's downfall morally explicable. Explicable means it can be explained. It's reasonable. I think that's what it means. So it's true that the great majority of tragic heroes do possess hubris or a proud and passionate mind that seems to make the hero's downfall morally explicable. But such hubris is only the precipitating agent of catastrophe, just as in comedy, the cause of the happy ending is usually some act of humility, often performed by a noble character who is meanly disguised. I have to say, all of this is new to me. I've never really given any thought or done any reading about tragedy and comedy and stuff like that. This is kind of interesting. Like I never thought that in comedy the cause of the happy ending is usually some act of humility, often performed by a noble character who is meanly disguised. But now I've forgotten what the question was. An act of humility in comedy is most analogous to. So this is analogous to what in the tragedy? An act of humility does what? An act of humility is the cause of the happy ending. And in a tragedy, what makes the hero's downfall morally explicable? Hubris. It's the precipitating agent of catastrophe, just as in comedy, the cause of the happy ending. Okay. Yeah, so I think I'm going to go with an answer choice that says it's hubris by the tragic hero, I guess, who is maybe not a noble character, meanly disguised, but the opposite. It's a tragic hero's pride and passion. Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna go with C. I just scanned all 5 answer choices, and it seems to me that C is the most analogous to act of humility. Okay, C. All right, so perfect score. Definitely, this is a passage on which I would spend quite a bit of time, and how I wouldn't run out of time on the verbal section, given that I would spend so much time on this passage, is that when I get an answer choice that I absolutely love, I stop looking at the remaining answer choices. So this goes for critical reasoning and reading comprehension, not for sentence correction. So that's one way that I save a lot of time. The other way is in sentence correction. So in sentence correction, I really think deeply about what the author is trying to convey. And what is the author's purpose in the sentence, in sentence correction? And I have videos on the channel. I'll put a link to one of them in the corner and in the description below, so you can check that out. But that's a way for me to save a lot of time in sentence correction, because it's really not so much about grammar for me. It's much more about which of these answer choices most logically conveys the thing that I believe the author was attempting to convey, because a lot of them will mess it up. They'll put the emphasis in the wrong place of the sentence, stuff like that. So I tend to be really quick in sentence correction and critical reasoning, thanks to those strategies, and that leaves me a lot of time for reading comprehension. The only other thing I'll highlight here is that, as you've probably noticed, I do a lot of work, as much work as I feel is necessary to do, before I look at the answer choices in reading comprehension. And the same goes for critical reasoning. So I do all of the work, all of the thinking, as much as I can prior to looking at the answer choices. And the reason that that's a good idea is because the answer choices are always going to include 4 trap answers. So if I don't do the work ahead of time, I'm much more likely to be attracted to those trap answers. So anyway, hope you found this helpful. Let me know in the comments below if you'd like more of these or anything else you'd like to see on this channel. And until next time, see you later.